Welcome to Popcorn Unscripted, the podcast where we dive into movies and TV shows with no scripts, no filters, just real talk and plenty of popcorn. From timeless classics to the newest releases, it's all about real opinions and unfiltered conversation. I'm your host, Bailey, and let's grab some popcorn, sit back, and let the show begin. Let's go back to where summer camp became a death sentence, and where one of horror's most iconic franchises got its bloody start. Welcome back to Fright Corn Fest, and welcome to episode 47. So, this episode is going to be on Friday the 13th. And not the 2009 remake, but the original 1980 movie. Now, I will say, this movie was definitely not about Jason more so than it was about his mother. Although, this was about Jason in a sense, even though Jason ended up not being the one doing the killings throughout the entire movie. Or some people say, oh, it could have been Jason throughout the whole movie, and, or I'm probably one of those people, if I'm going to be completely honest. But everybody knows it's actually Jason's mother, Pamela Voorhees, who kills all of the camp counselors that are there trying to reopen the camp. So, if you have never seen this movie, I'm just going to give you, a brief overview. So, Crystal Lake's history of murder doesn't deter counselors from setting up a summer camp in this woodsy area. Superstitious locals warn against it, but, of course, the fresh-faced young people, which is Jack, Alice, Bill, Marcy, and Ned, pay little heed to the old-timers. Then they find themselves stalked by a brutal killer. As they're slashed, shot, and stabbed, the counselors struggle to stay alive against a merciless opponent. And as I mentioned, it ended up being Pamela Voorhees. So let's get into just the plot recap. I kind of gave you guys a bit of a bit of an overview. But, before we get into that, I also want to say that this movie launched an entire franchise after that. I mean, I would say Friday the 13th became as big as Halloween, as Nightmare on Elm Street became as big as all four of these classics that I'm going through, they were really big hits in the 80s, for sure. And if I also remember correctly, Scream came in the early 90s rather than the early 80s, or rather than the late 80s, if I remember correctly. But I digress. So, what happened on Friday the 13th in 1980? So, this is the plot. So, in 1958, at Camp Crystal Lake, camp counselors Barry and Claudette steal away from other counselors for a late-night rendezvous in a supply shed, and an unseen assailant attacks and murders them. So, that's so the movie started out with that, and so and then after that sort of thing, we kind of time jump a little bit to maybe, I don't even know what year this movie actually takes place, when, in 1958, that's when they died. But, in this movie, these camp counselors and such are trying to reopen Camp Crystal Lake. So that's when we're introduced to Annie, Alice, Steve, Ned, all of them. And not only that, but while they are trying to get this camp ready to reopen, there's foreshadowing from town locals and things of that nature. I don't actually remember the main guy with the mustache that's kind of trying to help, but he ends up leaving them all alone. for like a few days, if I remember correctly. He leaves them alone for a few days so that they can do their thing and kind of clean up the camp and things of that nature and get everything ready. They put the dock together and things like that. But unfortunately, they were being watched. As you see in the movie, there are creepy POV shots, and as I mentioned, the feeling of being watched. But this is like I would say, like, I wouldn't say typical, but I mean, in most, like, horror movies today, you have, like, a group of people, and, they're alone, the group of teenagers, they're alone, and they're being watched, being stalked by something. I mean, heck, Until Dawn is the same exact trope, where a group of teenagers are somewhere and they're being stalked and watched, and then they ended up getting killed. But yeah, it's just an absolutely classic setup, because you have a group of young people, an isolated setting, and then something lurking in the woods. Whereas they are very, very unaware of it, obviously. So, what a fortunate thing too is that, of course, as I mentioned, Pamela is the killer in this one, and Jason only briefly appears at the end as a jump scare, and the true killer is, of course, his mother, who is seeking revenge for him. But I also find it interesting that at the end, you can hear Jason's kid voice come through her, and I know me and Dylan had talked about it last episode a little bit as well, and he didn't catch that in that movie, and so I did, and I was like, Jason was the one pushing her to do the murders, and then as she's dead, now he's the one that comes back and ends up trying to avenge his mother for her getting beheaded there at Camp Crystal Lake. And another thing that I want to talk about, because I don't think this is really talked about with Jason specifically, because of the kind of supernatural thing that he is. So the Jason who has a disability depends on which Jason you mean. Jason Voorhees, the horror character. So Jason is described as having hydrocephalus, which is an enlarged head due to excess fluid, and also learning disabilities. And it also led to him having facial deformities and mental impairments. So he was certainly not there, and he genuinely had to be watched and kept an eye on. And I can honestly see where Pamela kind of comes from, because it's like, I leave my son in your capable hands, and you let him drown. But that also makes me wonder, like, why did Jason go out into the lake so late at night? Like, why did he do that? Which, of course, he wasn't all there, but that just made me wonder. I was just like, why? I just don't know. I don't really understand why, but yeah, he had a lot of different disabilities, and these camp counselors just kind of brush it off, they're just like, oh yeah, he'll be fine, but clearly he was not fine, and he ended up dying tragically by drowning. So why does it work even when it's simple? Friday the 13th isn't deep, but it knows what it is. So the plot is just so super simple. It's just a group of teenagers at a camp trying to, they're just teenagers. I mean, they're just doing teenager things, such as having rendezvous. I'll put it that way. And, it's just your typical teenager life in the 80s, I guess. But you also have the isolation, which makes this group of teenagers very vulnerable, and the pacing of the movie, too. That's another thing I want to talk about. I feel like the movie dragged on a bit too long in the beginning. I think it took too long to kind of get going. I think it took too long for Pamela to make the first kill. If I'm being completely honest, because it's like halfway through the movie when everybody starts dying, you know, and I just feel like like, of course you wanted to do the character building, you want to get to know these characters, but at the same time, I just felt like it just kind of dragged there in the beginning, if I'm going to be completely honest. But then again, I haven't watched this movie a lot of times. Even though I'm actually a very big Jason fan. I do like Jason. I genuinely want to see Michael Myers and Jason go at it at some point. Like, Blumhouse, please. I know your Michael's dead, but please bring him back like they did Jason. You know, just throwing that out there. But I digress. And to be fair, all the practical effects too, like, were very well done for the 80s, I would say. Because if I really think about it, I mean, I didn't even really notice them, which is actually really good. To be honest, which, again, I haven't watched this movie that many times, but it's certainly interesting, and I love how gnarly the kills are too. Like, especially after that the couple had got done having sex, and she ended up stabbing him through the mattress. I think that was an interesting kill. Maybe not. And then I think it was Ned that died first. Who died? I don't remember who exactly died first, but there was a guy on the top. There was a dead body on the top bunk, and stuff too. So I just, you know, this movie certainly builds tension, but again, I feel like it kind of drags a little bit in the beginning. But at the same time, this movie still works. It's still very enjoyable to watch. You know, like, you don't ever see it coming. And especially, which of course, you don't know, you think it's Jason. Well, actually, if you're really watching this for the first time, you actually don't know who it is that's doing the killings. You really don't know who it is. I want to say that the death of Jason is mentioned by the counselors, but I don't think I don't think that they had thought too much of it, so they kind of just dismissed it, or whatever, because I do think the history of the camp was kind of brought up at some point, which of course you had the townsfolk kind of giving them warnings and things of that nature, so there's also that. But I will say, I feel like the peak of the movie is when Pamela Voorhees finally shows her face, and you know, and yeah, because there's only one person left, there's only one girl left, so it's like, you're not gonna see who I am anyway, you're not gonna see what I've done, you know, you're not gonna see anything, I'm gonna murder you anyway. But as the ending continues, the more I think that Jason may have possessed his mother, in a sense, seeing as he was able to speak through his mother. Because if you really listen between the differences, you can hear a child's voice and then her voice. You can hear the difference between the two voices, which I find to be very, very cool, and that was a very nice detail that the director did, and I enjoy that very, very much. But I know we've talked a good bit about Jason, but let's talk about Pamela Voorhees. She walks in looking like a nice lady from town, wanting help and things like that, and it ends up being one of the most memorable horror villains of all time. And I will say, I was not expecting her to try to murder her. I genuinely thought, like, the person doing the killings was Jason the entire time, and then she popped in, and she tries to kill the last person. And so I was very, like, I was even caught by surprise, even though this was technically my first time watching it. This was technically my first time. I think I've seen bits and pieces of it, but this was my first time watching it all the way through. And, of course, her motive for these killings were getting revenge for her son, Jason. And let me see if I can find it, because her monologue, I didn't really get to, like, couldn't really hear her monologue, but it was very, very intriguing to me. So, just to kind of give you a breakdown, so here's just a little portion of her monologue, because I genuinely think, like, you can hear it, like, even through her voice, you can hear how much grief and how distraught she is, how angry she is, through this monologue. And the actress that played Mrs. Voorhees did an absolutely amazing job. So this is the portion I've got. Did you know a young boy drowned the year before those two others were killed? The counselors weren't paying any attention. They were making love while that young boy drowned. His name was Jason. I was working the day that it happened, preparing meals. Here, I was the cook. Jason should have been watched every minute. He was. He wasn't a very good swimmer. We can go now, dear. And then after this statement, her true nature is revealed, and then she then proceeds to attack. Alice is her name. And so, in this monologue, we get the cause of death of Jason. So, Pamela, of course, blames the counselors for their negligence, stating they were making love instead of watching her son, which I agree. They should have been watching him, I'm just curious on how he ended up in the lake in the first place. That's what bothers me. That's a detail that I'm just like, how did he end up in the lake? Like, did he just walk in there thinking, like, I'm gonna go for a swim, even though I don't know how to swim. Like, I don't get how he was in the lake. Like, how did he end up in the lake? Did he just walk into the lake? Did he, like, that, I feel like that's a bit of a detail that's not necessarily answered. And then, of course, you have her identity and motive. She, of course, identifies herself as Jason's mother and explains her rage and desire for revenge. And, which, of course, this being said, the two killings that were at the beginning of the movie in 1958, those killings happened a year after her son died. So, through this monologue, she expresses her pain and rage over Jason's death, declaring that the counselors must be punished and that she is Jason's mother enacting her vengeance. And then you have, in the monologue, the revelation of her rage. This seemingly sweet mother figure reveals her vengeful persona preparing to kill Alice, and Alice ended up being the last one to die by Mrs. Voorhees. But she does live, because she ends up beheading Mrs. Voorhees, unfortunately. So there's that. And Betsy Palmer is the actress's name. She played this character so well. Like, the way she shifted from being this kind woman that's willing to help to somebody that's so mentally unstable is just incredible. And then, of course, her, because I genuinely think it's two audio tracks for her voice and then a kid's voice for when Jason was speaking to her. Like Jason was telling her, "Kill her, mommy, kill her, get her, go get her," that voice was coming through her. And so I think her mouthing those words, because I genuinely think, or she could have very well have said the lines while acting out in the scene. I'm not exactly sure, but if it was done that way, she mouthed very, very well. But I'm sure she probably just said the words and then they put in a second audio track over that, and which I don't know how editing worked in 1980, but it worked very, very well, very, very well. And so now we'll talk about Alice and the final girl breakdown. So Alice is not very flashy. She is the more timid out of all of the counselors. She is certainly the one that kind of, I would say she was the one that kind of just, like, held everybody together, held everybody to a standard, and kind of just, made sure things happened properly and made sure nothing had went wrong. But she isn't flashy by any means, but she fights. And that's what makes her stand out. It's like everybody that you see get killed dies with their guard down, except for the one that gets killed in the archery range. Which, I mean, technically you could say her guard was down, but it wasn't like the others, like the guy that went to the generator room, and then of course the guy that died in the bunk beds, and then of course I think one was killed in the bathrooms. I'm sure. I'm trying to remember because this has been a while since I had actually watched it, so I'm trying to remember everything. But I will say I'm gonna compare her to Laurie. I'm going to compare her to Laurie Strode. I don't necessarily think she's up to par as Laurie, but they both have the same amount of fight in them. So I think that's what makes her a good, like, final girl, like, final person that needs to die. And I will say she is a strong fighter, and I think that's what makes her character very strong, especially down in the end, because she does end up killing Pamela. Whereas, if I remember correctly, with Laurie, she doesn't. She's just trying to run away from Michael, and Dr. Loomis ends up shooting him, and he falls out of the window and lands on the ground, and things like that. So, there's that as well. But if we were to compare her to Nightmare on Elm Street, I don't remember that girl's name. I will say, out of the three that I've seen so far, I would say Nightmare on Elm Street's final girl, I would say she's probably the most badass out of the three, because she literally brought a demon out of another dimension and set him on fire. And, yeah. I would say that's pretty badass of her. As far as that goes. But I would definitely say that Alice is definitely on par with Laurie. And you know, and I hate to say it because Jamie Lee Curtis did so well as Laurie Strode. I just think Laurie wasn't up to fighting him off. Or she didn't really know how to fight Michael off. But this girl was like, I don't know. When she was trying to fight Pamela, like, she knew what... She tried to use everything around her to her advantage, whereas Laurie was just trying to run, instead of fight. Which, then again, I can't blame Laurie for that, but at the same time, like, if you are being attacked, why not just go? Just do it. Just, like, they're trying to kill you. It's either you or them, It's you or them at that point. And so, I'll say that. And then, of course, at the very end, you have the dream fake out, where she actually is in the boat. And then Jason, of course, it actually scared me, not gonna lie. I knew he was gonna come out of the water, but it still got me. But, I still think that was an interesting way to end this movie for sure. Is by Jason jumping out of the water and scaring her scaring her. And so I think that was pretty cool. A cool way to end the movie, because now we see, I think that's like that fake out dream that she had. I want to say, like, I haven't watched any of the other movies. I haven't watched 2 or 3 or anything like that, so I don't know what happens. So I'm kind of like giving my thoughts to it. I think what will happen, since I haven't seen these movies, what I think that dream meant is that even though Pamela's dead, Jason's gonna come back and get his vengeance for her now. I think that was a sign that Jason's coming back, since he's the one that jumped out of the water and pulled her down under. So I think that's what happens. Although I have seen Freddy vs. Jason, that's probably one of my favorites. I do like it, even though it's so corny. I just love it. I love Freddy vs. Jason, and I was actually looking at other things too. But apparently it's not until the 6th movie where Jason gets his supernatural abilities. And it's actually in the 4th movie where Jason is actually killed. Because from this first movie till 6, or actually you should probably say 2nd movie till 6, he is a killable entity. Now, it's after the 6th movie where he can take, like, all fatal blows. Like, he's immortal at that point. He has, like, which some people want to say that Jason has teleportation abilities, especially if you look at the Friday the 13th game that ended up being shut down, unfortunately. If you look at that game, some of the mechanics, some people say that he could teleport. I'm not sure if I believe that, but then again, it does say he has supernatural abilities, so it's very possible that he could travel through dimensions to do that, which would also make sense for Freddy vs. Jason too, because, I mean, you know, I think that would also make sense for that movie as well, but I digress. So we'll get into the top kills and horror moments. Honestly, I forgot Kevin Bacon was in this movie. I genuinely forgot. Like, he's been in a bunch of stuff. I know he has been in a bunch of stuff. Which, of course, he's the guy, he was in Footloose, which is probably one of the things he's most known for, is Footloose. I want to say I've watched Footloose, but not all the way through. Or I've seen bits and pieces of Footloose. But yeah, that's probably one of the other ones that I only know him from. Yeah, none of these other movies that I'm looking at are ringing any bells. If I'm being honest. Apollo 13, I haven't seen that movie, but I definitely want to watch it. I know it's good. Especially since I'm big on space. Oh, he was in X-Men First Class, but I don't remember who he played. As far as that goes, I honestly forgot he was in Friday the 13th. But he's the guy that ended up playing Jack Burrell. Wait, was that the guy with the mustache? Was Jack Burrell the guy with the mustache that was... I don't know. I'm just trying to think of who... Like, I'm terrible with I'm just terrible with names in general. But, yeah. But yeah, so he gets his throat slit, and then you have one that gets an axe to the face, and then of course you have the archery target, and then you have Pamela Voorhees' decapitation. All of these kills that are in this movie are super brutal, which of course these are all in fits of rage and acts of rage, so... It's fair. Like, you know, but that's Jason's whole shtick, is that he's brutal, and that he finds, which of course Michael Myers does too, which is what makes Michael and Jason so similar, is that they both can be creative with their kills. More so Jason than Michael, I think. Because Michael does stick to one weapon of choice, whereas Jason will use anything in the environment to his advantage, although his choice of weapon is a machete, which is what me and Dylan had discussed last episode, is that's why he carries a machete, because his mom was decapitated with a machete, so I kind of get that. But literally all of the kills were brutal. I don't remember a lot of them, because again, I only watched this movie once. But I will say the director did not hold back with these, and I do agree that these effects and things still hold up in all of their 80s glory. By far. I didn't even notice anything, off about the movie or anything like that. I didn't really notice anything, at all. So this movie was very, very good in that sort of aspect. But getting into the franchise impact and its legacy. So Jason's not even the killer in this one, and still Friday the 13th exploded. And so I want to talk about also the birth of the Jason legend as well. So, just looking at the legend of Jason Voorhees, so it began with his troubled birth on June 13th, 1946. Now, keep in mind, Jason died when he was 11 years old. And he was born to his mother Pamela and Elias Voorhees, which was his dad, who was affected with hydrocephalus and facial deformities, leading to an isolated childhood. After being bullied and seemingly drowning in 1957 at Camp Crystal Lake, his mother took revenge. However, Jason actually survived, returning to find his mother murdered, which triggered his own spree of vengeance that created his legendary status as a murderous slasher. Now, that's actually interesting to find out, because I honestly didn't think that Jason survived, but I did say in my theory that the dream was like a vision, like that Jason's going to return, like Jason's gonna come back, things like that. I think that's actually pretty cool to look at, not gonna lie. But I will say, since this movie came out in 1980, Halloween came out in 1978. So, it's really after Friday the 13th that this slasher genre kind of just exploded. And they made more Halloween movies, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, Scream. All of these franchises came from this boom of just, slasher horror, just horrific ways of dying. As I mentioned, I also haven't watched any of the sequels. I do plan to at some point, since it is spooky season and Fright Corn Fest this month. But I definitely can't really say anything, the difference between this and later sequels, other than comparing it to Freddy vs. Jason, which I don't even know if I want to call that a Jason sequel, because it's both Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street. It wrapped up in one movie, but I do enjoy that movie quite a lot. But I will say, I do think that as the franchise went on, the movies certainly went off the rails. Like, Jason even went to space. Jason went to New York. He went to space. Jason was all about it, I think. But this movie, it's simple, brutal, and classic, and sometimes that's all you need for a good scare. So, here are some of my questions for you guys. Do you think Friday the 13th still holds up today? When did you first realize Jason wasn't the killer in this one? And which kill is still stuck in your brain? Please let me know down below. And, yeah. That's a wrap on today's episode of Popcorn Unscripted. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. New episodes drop every Monday and Friday, so be sure to tune in. Until next time, keep your popcorn close and your movie critiques closer. Thanks for listening to Popcorn Unscripted.